Some of the coolest pieces of refinished furniture that I've seen are done with decoupage paper. There are thousands of designs to choose from. I started decoupaging on furniture with small napkins that I bought from Etsy. They have an endless supply of designs. Decoupaging napkins is really easy since they're really small. After I did that for a couple years, I moved on to tissue paper and rice paper, which are a little bit trickier because they are on a much bigger scale. I've done a few decoupage projects on this channel and never, not even once did it go smooth. Common problems you'll face with decoupaging on furniture is number one, wrinkling. Some wrinkling is fine. Too much wrinkling and it looks just kind of crazy. Number two, seams. This isn't a really big one, but sometimes you can see the seams from the paper to the piece of furniture, and it just doesn't look right. You want to camouflage that most of the time, and there's a couple of techniques you can use to do that. Number three is air bubbles. Sometimes when you put the decoupage furniture up, you'll get an air bubble behind the paper, and eventually that paper will come up. So that's a big mistake. And number four is tearing. Tearing happens if you add too much sealer medium or maybe too much water if you're spraying. So that happens quite often. And because the tissue paper is just so thin, it's really easy to rip. I know these things make decoupaging on furniture seem very intimidating, but in today's video, I want to share with you the secret on how to become a master of decoupage and why it's so important that you get started right now. I came across this little dresser on Facebook Marketplace and immediately knew it would be the perfect piece for decoupage. It was way overpriced. This is one of those like Home Goods or TJ Maxx kind of finds. I hate to say it, but it's not real wood. They're not the best quality. So she did come down in price. She went to $50. So I got lucky there. I tried for $40, but she was a hard negotiator. I brought it home. I removed all the hardware. I marked the drawers so that I wouldn't get them mixed up, just numbered them. And I cleaned up the piece. I'm using my white lightning cleaner. It's from Dixie Belle, it's TSP. Some other cleaners, I wear my gloves because it's a chemical. And then when I'm done with that, I rinse it down just with a wet rag with water. And then after it's all clean, I just need to do some repairs. The popping off of the drawer front. So I'm just using some wood glue and clamping it down. I did use some Dixie Belle's mud. You could use wood filler just to fill in some of the holes. It's supposed to look that way. This is, it looks like it's dirty, but it's not. That's just the style. It's, I don't know, antiqued or distressed or whatever you want to call it. I waited a couple hours, and once the mud dried, I sanded it flush. Because it's not real wood and the surface is kind of shiny, I'm using Sticks, which is an adhesive primer. It helps to make sure that my chalk paint is going to adhere properly and I won't have any peeling, like it'll pass the scratch test. It just helps that paint to stick on the piece like glue. So I add 2 coats, I wait 2 hours in between the coats, and then I wait 12 hours before I apply my paint. So I just let it sit overnight. I'm using my roller to apply the primer because I don't want there to be a lot of brush strokes. Always keep in mind, the final outcome of how you apply your paint is totally based on your primer. So if you have brush strokes in your primer, you'll definitely have brush strokes in your finish. Now all my prep work is done and I am ready for the decoupage paper. I found this paper on Facebook from whimsykel.com. It's Whimsykel Designs. That was the Facebook page that I had found it at. She sells a ton of different designs, and when I saw this one, I just knew I had to have it. It's so cool and so different than any other design. Skulls are not for everybody, but I kind of like that. It's different. Now, one of the common problems we talked about at the beginning of this video was seams. Seams are really tricky to get rid of. And I know that you're going to be able to see the seams in the front of this on the sides. So I am using a little bit of water and a brush. I'm just going to apply it to that super straight line. and I'm gonna rip it, and I'm gonna rip it towards me. If you go on Whimsical Designs on Facebook, she has some videos on how she does her decoupage paper that I thought were super helpful. And, you know, keep that in mind. Whoever's decoupage papers you're buying, check out to see if they have a YouTube channel, a website, a Facebook page, and if they have any tutorials. They have great tips there. And sometimes, you know, if it's been a little while in between my projects, I forget. So it's a good refresher. I know Mint by Michelle, she has some great videos. She has ambassadors and content creators that make videos. So, you know, whoever's paper you're using, check out their tutorials. So this is what I did for this one, and that's because I don't want there to be any of those straight lines. So I got some ragged edges, and I think it's gonna make it a lot easier for me to blend the sides when I'm trying to camouflage it with paint. Now for the decoupage process, I always use a little bit of plastic wrap. I use my brush, I grab my sealer, I often use the Dixie Belle's clear coat because sometimes, I don't know, some sealers, they dry really fast. This one, I get a little bit more working time, and I like that so I can take my time and kind of focus on my project. So I give a little spritz with my water mister to the paper, and that's because I believe the fibers in the paper are able to expand a little bit, and I get a lot less wrinkling. So I apply my sealer to the piece, and I like to work in rows, but I like to work in smaller sections. I find that I get a lot less wrinkling when I'm in a smaller section because I can smooth it out without rushing to get to that next section. And that's important to me. I think the hardest part of decoupaging is lining the paper up. I always end up crooked somehow. This went really well this time because, as you can see, I just matched it right up to the front. I centered that little flower in the middle. I knew that was going to be my center, so it right there. It was just a lot easier. I wouldn't decoupage on every piece of furniture. I think that the piece of furniture has to kind of call for it. And this one I feel like was just perfect. The drawers are flat. There are the little space between the drawers. I don't bother with that. I don't stress about that. I just apply the paper, and then once it's all dry, I will go back with a razor and cut along those lines. So that's not a real issue for me, the space between the drawers. That I just work with it. So as you can see, I do have a lot of working time with this sealer, and I like that a lot. I'm rubbing, but not rubbing too hard, because if you rub too hard with the plastic, the ink on the decoupage paper will come off. So I'm gently rubbing. Right here, I see that I'm getting a wrinkle. I'm just gonna spritz a little bit more and try to get that wrinkle out. But some wrinkles are okay. Some are gonna happen. You can't really do anything about it. So if there's 1 or 2 wrinkles, or even 6 or 7 wrinkles in your paper, that's fine. It's when there's, you know, unless you're trying for wrinkles, because that's a whole nother look in itself. The wrinkled look goes really good with certain kind of papers, but if you're not going for it, then, you know, try to get them out. If you can't get them out, just leave them and move on. Like, this paper has so much going on with it. That's one other reason I love these kind of papers. The wrinkles don't look bad. They look like they're just part of it. I'm taking my time with this paper. Right here, that's where right now I'm like, oh, I could pull the whole paper up and try to get that wrinkle out, but really it's not a big deal. So I'm leaving it. It looks good. Then I'm just gonna follow this process now down the whole entire paper. I'm gently, slowly taking my time. You don't wanna go too slow though, because you don't want your sealer to dry. I've got a few minutes to apply each row of my decoupage paper. So really, it's all about taking your time and kind of giving it the love that it needs. And I know that sounds so silly, but the decoupage paper is really fragile. It's so thin, so you want to be careful. And like right now, if I had sprayed way too much water, then I would wait a couple minutes for that water to dry and then go ahead and add my next couple of rows of sealer. Thinking back on the first time I decoupaged, I'll say I was so scared. I was terrified because if I had made a mistake, how was I going to fix it? Like, that was my biggest fear. What if I ripped the paper? What if it didn't stick? What if there were air bubbles? What was I going to do? And I had to make those mistakes. I made all of them. There were so many wrinkles. It was just so nasty. It didn't go at all like I wanted it to. But I learned so much from that one time. And every time I learned something new. Each time I decoupage, I learned something new. Because no surface is the same. No piece of furniture is the same. So you're always gonna have different challenges. But with each project, you're gonna get better and better because you're gonna learn with each project something new. I left the piece overnight and I'm ready to use my razor blade to cut the space in between the drawers so I can open and close the drawers. For this part of the process, just make sure that you're using a really sharp razor. So if your razor's dull, grab another razor head and swap it out. Because you don't want to, if it's dull, it'll rip the paper. And even if you rip the paper, you can totally fix it by painting it in, but you want to avoid ripping the paper at all costs. So if it's just switching out the blade, that's easy enough. I still haven't added the layer of sealer over the top yet, and that's okay. I never do it right away. I never do it when my sealer on the bottom is still wet. I usually leave it for a couple hours. That's because, see all these little frayed edges? I like to get them out of the way first. So I start at the top of the piece. I look at all the frayed edges. I grab a 220 grit or higher sanding block or sanding pad, and I just start to get rid of any of the excess paper that we're not gonna use. And some of it you can just add your sealer and fold it over, but when you have drawers that they're in there pretty tightly, you want to get rid of them. You don't want to keep adding more stuff, or you won't be able to open your drawers. Like the top of this, I know there's a good space, so I'm going to add my sealer to all that excess right there underneath it, and then I'm going to end up rolling it over because I know that I'll be able to get the drawers open and closed still. So right there, I'm using it on the front side of the paper now, and we're just folding it in. The sides, that was a really tight space, so I sanded it off. And now I'm just working my way down the piece. I'm gonna do that on every opening of the drawers, and then as I work my way down, I just seal over the paper everywhere. And here's how I handle the actual drawers. Usually the tops and the bottoms and the sides will come up a little bit, so I just reseal them when I'm putting on my top layer of sealer. So I already have it sealed underneath, but always the sides, they fray. They just kind of pop up on me. And a couple people have asked me how I deal with it. I deal with it when I'm putting the sealer over the paper. So I'll sand off all that excess again, and then we'll seal it. We'll seal under and over one more time. And don't be afraid if when you put the sealer on top, If it starts to wrinkle again, don't worry about it. It's gonna dry and the wrinkles should go away. Most of the time they do. Don't panic, just leave it, let it dry. So now it's time to camouflage the seams, to paint the rest of the piece, to get rid of any place that the paper came off. You know, you can see around the drawers where the paper came up, we want to camouflage all of it. I grabbed a bunch of different colors. I'm not going to use them all. I just was grabbing colors that I saw in the background. So for this one, I'm doing one full base coat of Dusty Blue. And I was going back and forth between Dusty Blue and Stormy Seas, but I decided to go with the Dusty Blue because my base coat is going to get covered mostly, and I do see a lot of that, that Stormy Seas in the paper. So I'm just going to work with that next. Whenever I'm working with a decoupage paper that has that sort of that artistic, cloudy, colorful background, I use a stippling motion with my brush because that's how I create that same cloudy look that's in the paper. Here's where I realize I do have a bubble. Bubbles happen when the sealer didn't get behind the piece. So I have this thing, a bag of disposable syringes. I know they can be scary, but they are so not scary. I get them off of Amazon. They come in a package just like that. And I get it, syringes are scary, but I found them to be the most convenient way to do this. You could slice your paper with a razor blade, but just this little teeny tiny hole, that's all it takes and it's done. If you could even believe, I was a phlebotomist in my 20s. A phlebotomist who's afraid of needles. That didn't work out, obviously. But I get it. If you're afraid to use the needle and you're not comfortable with it, you could always just add a little slice with your razor and then put some of that sealer underneath. With that, you might damage the paper and then have to paint over it, but that's okay too. Those are things that you're just, as you go on, you're going to learn how to do, and you're going to feel way more comfortable doing them. Now, back to the paper. We have our rigid, our rugged edge here, and that looks pretty great. You can see a couple of wrinkles there. You can see on the edges of the drawers that it needs some paint. I've chose my colors. This one is, they're all by Dixie Belle. I will link them in the description box down below, but right now I'm adding my Stormy Seas right over that Dusty Blue. The Dusty Blue is dry. Then I'm gonna add Antebellum Blue, a little bit of that, and everything I do here, I'm not using my water mister, and I'm just taking a tiny bit of it and stippling. I'm stippling it all while it's wet, and I'm blending them all while they're wet. And I'm working in small sections. I know this video is a lot longer than my normal videos, but I think that when I started out, I wished that I could watch somebody do this process. I think I would have learned a lot quicker. So here I am adding that in the navy now, because I see a lot of navy in the actual paper. So I think this will go really nice. And the colors don't match perfectly with the paper. And the more you blend and blot and add the colors and take the colors away, the closer you're gonna get to the paper. Just look at the paper. Look where there's a light spot, add some light. Look where there's darker spots, add a little bit of dark. I'm just listening to my instincts, I guess. I'm playing around with the colors, and the more you do it, the better you're gonna get. Like, there's light in there, so I'm going back with that dusty blue and adding a little bit of light. I could have even added a little bit of like a cream or white, but I didn't. So I have my colors picked out, and I also, like right there, I'm using a dry brush. The dry brush is super important. There's my dry brush again, because it's going to give that look. That stippled dry brush is going to give it that cloudy blended look. Occasionally, once there's too much paint loaded on my brush, I do take a towel and wipe it. I also like to lay my drop cloth down, and I just wipe it on my drop cloth right like at my knees. So here my first layer was dusty blue, then a little bit of stormy seas, then a little bit more dusty blue, then a little bit of antebellum blue. But everything I'm stippling and I'm just layering, and there's gonna be you're not gonna be able to see any of the seams. The seams are gonna be totally camouflaged. Here we are again with in the navy, and then I need to soften it up with some more light, so I do some dusty blue, and then back to stormy seas. And as I go down the piece, I see some more green. So I'm adding, Dixie Belle has this new color called Weeping Willow, which is really, really pretty. And I add some of that because it's like this, it's a lighter shade of green, and I feel like it matches the light green in there, but it also goes really good with the flowers. Actually, this is it right here. So this was almost a perfect match. Now here is where I fix any tears or any parts of the paper that are missing. I'm just gonna grab those colors that I've been using. I'm not being super particular. You don't have to with the decoupage paper. It already looks like it's a painting. So just mixing some of those colors together. And I always use my fingers at this part. I love the decoupage papers because it's just fun and freeing, and you can be very artful. So I put some of that on, and then I take some of it off with my fingers. I blend with my fingers. Don't take this so seriously. Just have fun with it, and really just like listen to your gut. And here's where it's really coming together now. And check this out. So that's one side done, and then the other side undone. I'm gonna show you here how I did the top and the sides. This is sped up. I'm only gonna show you the top because I did exactly what I'm doing on the top to the sides. And then for the back, I used in the navy, I did 2 coats. Just the plain in the navy. I'm not gonna get fancy with the back of the piece, but I do want it to look finished. Someone who's a master of their craft screws up more than they can count. It's a necessary part of the process to make mistakes. How else will you learn how to fix them? When you're looking at a furniture artist's work on Instagram or Facebook, you're only getting part of the story. You're skipping straight to the end. You're getting the perfect, polished, staged photo. What you don't see is the mess that got them there. You don't see the struggles, the wrinkles, the tears that probably occurred during the process. It's the ugly truth no artist wants to talk about. Can you imagine asking a master decoupager, master of decoupage, master of decoupage. You ask the master, you say, hey, when you get a tear in your decoupage paper, how do you fix it? Can you imagine them saying back to you, oh, I've never had a tear in my decoupage paper. It comes out perfect every single time. That person would not be considered a master. A master of this craft knows how to fix a tear in the decoupage paper 1,000 different ways because they've made 1,000 different mistakes. A master puts in the time, they put in the work, and they make a boatload of mistakes. Because the knowledge acquired from the mistakes is where you will find the most valuable information. To seal my paint and the decoupage paper, I do 2 more coats of Dixie Belle's clear coat in satin. I'm using a paintbrush on the drawer fronts, and then I'm going to use my sprayer on the rest of the piece. I add 2 coats, waiting about an hour or 2 in between the coats. And my last step was to add some new hardware to the piece. So simply put, the secret lesson to mastering decoupage is to accept the challenge. Start right now, make all the mistakes, and learn from them. Hone your problem-solving skills, and you will become the master. Do I consider myself a master of decoupage? No way, not even close. But with each project, I get closer and closer. If you want to see more about decoupaging tissue paper on furniture, I have 2 other videos that I think you might enjoy. One where I used a heat gun to remove the wrinkles, and another where I tore the paper over and over, but you'll get to see how I fixed it. I'll link those in the description box below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you hit that like button and consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for watching.